Some years ago, while living in my old house alongside my mom and uncle, I witnessed some things that, to this day, I'm not quite certain of. My father had recently moved out after the divorce, along with my two half-brothers, leaving me the youngest of the three alone in a house with no one to play with or even just be around. My uncle and mom were always at work, and when they came home, they'd go to bed soon after. My uncle worked for the airlines and had to leave the house no later than 4 a.m. every morning. His alarm would go off at 3:30 a.m., but he'd just hit snooze over and over again until the clock struck 3:50. Finally, he would get up and leave in a hurry. Now, my mother worked in a real estate office, just a block away, and would leave at 6:30 a.m. sharp. And as she left, my grandma would show up and take care of me for the day. We would play all day, building Legos, pillow forts, and watch monster movies and bake together. I always felt so secure when she was by my side. It was almost as if the frailty of my parents' marriage never existed because of the love my grandma showed me. However, as I grew older, so did my grandma. It became harder and harder for her to keep up with my youthful spring. Her visits would become less frequent because now I was more mature and responsible. I could watch over myself. After all, my mom was only a block away. So after my mom intensely trained me to memorize everyone's phone numbers, I walked her over to the front door for work. She leaned over and kissed my cheek and said she loved me, and off she went. I closed and locked the door behind her, turned around facing the quiet air of my home. From the front door to the right is a long hallway that is lined with a bedroom in the corner where my uncle stayed, followed by a bathroom, a closet, another room that used to be where my brothers slept. Then all the way down was my room, followed by another bathroom. Then at the end of that hallway was my mother's room. Lastly, to the left of the end, was an opening that led into the living room. Now, if you didn't take the hallway, immediately straight from the door was the family room, then the kitchen, connecting to the living room. I swear, I could almost hear my brothers and I running in circles chasing each other. Now, being home alone for the first time, I noticed how unsettling the long, dark, and narrow hallway was. I thought to myself, surely anything could be behind one of those doors. Irrational, I know, but still, it was the thought that lingered. Luckily for me, there's a light switch next to each room, and I didn't need to worry because I could literally light the place up. That was until halfway through in the middle of the hall, the lights cut out. My heart sank and I ran for the next switch and slammed it on and kept running to the den, running like a baby from the hallway. After all, I still was just a kid, home and alone. After laughing it off, I turned the TV on and went all through the house, turning each and every light on. After the long day at home, my mother returned grateful to see I didn't burn the house down. The evening passed on and it was time to go to sleep, so she tucked me into my bed, but before leaving, I asked her to dim the light and to only close my door just a little bit. She did so and continued on watching TV in the living room. Slowly, I dozed off to the sound of the distant TV. And as I fell into complete silence, I jolted awake, sitting up, looking at my feet, around the room, and then up at my dim light. Groggy and tired, I turned to look at the door and saw the scattering of feet running from the frame. Speechless and confused, I jumped out of bed and slammed my door closed, turning on the lights and slowly backing away. Now, wide awake, I realized I'm not dreaming right now. Asking myself, was someone watching me? I sat on the floor beside my bed until the sun rose, and there was no 3:30 alarm clock because my uncle was at his girlfriend's house. No brothers playing tricks on me to scare me because they're with their mom. What did I see? That morning, my grandma came to care for me, and the day went on as usual. I was ever more grateful for her being with me, but at last she had to go back home once again when my mother came back. When it came time for bed, I asked my mom if I could sleep with her tonight. She said yes, but questioned why. I told her, I had nightmares last night, and I don't want to have more. So, off to bed we went. The room was quiet and dark. But the darkness was okay this time, because I had my mother in arm's reach. The clock beside her bed read 11:14 p.m. when I then heard the front door open and close. I now heard footsteps crescendoing up the hallway. My heart started to pick up in rhythm as the steps finally reached our bedroom door and a voice spoke out. "Hey, just letting you know I'm home. Good night." I exhaled in relief, catching my breath, and was giggling at my nervousness. It was my uncle who was home again. In fact, I felt a little more safe that he was now back again. After some time, I fell asleep. I was reassured at the feeling of my mom rolling over, and I felt comforted and calm. But again, I woke up to the sound of my uncle's alarm. This time, it only went off once, and I heard the front door open and close as his truck pulled away into the night silence. I then just laid awake, staring out the window, unable to fall asleep again. Finally, after my boredom began to settle in, I sat up and my eyes were met with a towering shadow standing at the foot of my bed. My eyes locked into the darkness of where a face should be. The shadow didn't flinch or run like what I saw the night before. It stayed and stared into me. I slammed my head back into the pillow and laid on my back, staring at the roof, crying. I felt the fear in my blood spread from the pumping of my heart. My stomach fell into my hips as my ears began ringing, and I could no longer hear my own heart beating thunderously out of my chest. I stayed there as still as my crying would let me. After some moments, I blinked out. I only remember that after that night, I would now be getting dropped off at my grandma's when my mom would go to work. However, I still remember what I saw that night. In fact, it wasn't the last time I saw whatever it is I saw. The last time would be years later and some days, when I was playing Xbox Live with my brother late into the night. He was with his mom, and I, of course, was with mine. And as the night crept on, in the corner of my eye, right in the entrance of the hallway from the den, I noticed what I thought looked like a child peeking around the frame. Except it was another shadow, a black silhouette, faceless in a aurora of darkness. When I finally whipped my head to face it, we looked at each other for less than a moment, and it turned away and ran down the hall, and I could hear the footsteps retreating away from me. And again, I was naturally frightened, but this time I didn't panic. I wasn't filled with that paralyzing fear. In fact, it was as if I had frightened it. I then calmly asked my brother to stay online with me because I was scared to walk down that hall again. And he stayed up with me until my mom woke up for work and saw that I was up all night playing video games. And she yelled at me and then yelled at my brother through the game. I kept what I saw to myself for years more. And it wasn't until a family dinner when my relatives were all sharing ghost stories and legends that I figured, I better share mine. I told them and they all listened, except I noticed that my uncle looked pale. He turned over and said to us, "The black silhouette?" I laughed and said, "Yeah, that's what it looks like. You've seen it?" To which he responded, "Yeah, a few times, but only in the corner of my eyes. Looks like they run before you actually can see them." I nodded, and truly I was just happy to hear that I wasn't alone and crazy. One of my cousins even shouted, "Yeah, I've seen it too. That's why I don't come over anymore." We all laughed, and years more, we all eventually moved out of the house, and another family moved in. And at our new house, nothing strange happened. No creaking of the floor, not even settling of pipes. Days later, we received a phone call from the new owners who moved into our old home, thanking us for taking care of the place and wishing us well. Until the lady hesitantly asked my mother, "Hey, actually, never mind, it's done." My mother urged her, "No, come on, what's up?" To which the woman replied, "It's just, was there another family here?" My mother asked, "What do you mean?" The lady responded, "I don't know, just, well, my son keeps hearing laughing from his room, and it's really freaking him out, and I told him to ignore it, that it was just an overactive imagination." The phone call eventually concluded, and I went to my new room and sat there wondering to myself, who or what lived alongside us in that house? I mean, what did they want? They never hurt me or my family from what I knew. It was weird. It was as if they just watched us quietly from the unlit spaces of their home.